Okay, so let's get started. So I want to welcome everybody. Tonight, I'm Chris Vandenheuvel. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Healdsburg Unified School District. We have nearly all of our administrators joining us on our panel, so I want to briefly introduce them. We have Principal Erica McGuire from Fitch Mountain Elementary School. We have Principal Jeff Franey from Healdsburg Elementary School, Principal Chris Miller from Healdsburg Junior High, Principal Bill Halliday from the high school, Assistant Principal Connie Marks from Healdsburg High School. And then we have three very important people who have been working quite hard, not that everybody else hasn't, but Director of Student Support Services, Diane Conger, has been working with our two district nurses, Varsi Hansen and Kristen Robinson, to work on the safety and wellness portion of our reopening plan. So they're all joining us tonight, and we'll have an opportunity to speak and answer questions as the presentation goes on. I want to just start by saying that we know that these are incredibly stressful times, and we're living that stress with you. We all live in the community. I have two kids at the high school. One is a senior this year. And so I am encountering this not only as an educator, but as a parent, and I make my decisions through that lens. And so I just want to share that with you, that we know this is incredibly hard for all of us. We want answers. We want to know what's happening in the fall. It's our intention to give you as much as we can tonight. And I'll tell you, though, kind of a preface of what we're going to say, things are changing quite rapidly. So I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about this evening, and then we'll begin the presentation. So Karen, if you could put the slides up. Okay, just one moment to pull up our slides and we'll get started. I'll just start talking. So tonight we're going to go through just briefly stakeholder engagement, how we've kind of arrived to the point we're at in terms of eliciting feedback from parents and staff and students. We want to talk about instructional delivery. What is instruction going to look like this year is the hot question I think that everybody wants an answer to. If we are in distance learning, what's that going to look like? If we're in hybrid learning, what's that going to look like? Safety and wellness, daily wellness checks, logistics, and then a brief overview site by site of what we're envisioning for opening school. And then finally, there's been some questions that have arisen lately around why can't we just reopen? And I want to speak to that specifically in some of the questions that have been there. So we'll begin with the next slide, Karen, with, actually you can move up 2 slides, please. We'll begin with stakeholder engagement. So at the end of distance learning, and let me preface what I'm going to say about distance learning and stakeholder engagement with, we were thrust into this very quickly last year, and we actually were pretty nimble compared to most districts. We were able to start moving right away. But we realized completely that distance learning wasn't the same as being in school. And because it was such an abrupt and emergency situation, there are things that we could have done better and that we intend to do better this go round when and if we have to be in distance learning. So I want to preface everything by that. Nonetheless, I was proud of our staff for how they stepped up and moved very quickly to basically establish a whole new way of doing school. But at the end of distance learning, we did ask for parent feedback as well as student feedback at the high school on how it went. And we got some really, as well as staff actually, and we got some really good feedback there. And then we, as you know, we administered a second parent survey around your desire to send your kids back to school or not. That happened, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it was pretty uniform in the district. Between 17 and 20% of parents were uncomfortable sending their kids back to school in any form and would request a distance learning program. We formed site committees that worked with our staff to start talking about best practices and instruction and really look at schedules and what would that look like, especially in a hybrid environment, which is what we anticipated, an environment where students would come for a couple days a week because we would have to social distance in classrooms, so we would only be able to take half the students at a time and then do distance learning on the other days. We're doing this town hall meeting, and we are engaged in employee group negotiations, both with the teachers union, HATA, and with CSEA, our classified employees union. And I'll say, rightfully, both groups are concerned about safety, and that's the crux of our conversations at this point. So we're working hard to engage you. You can expect probably another survey coming in the next few weeks, but I wanted to go through the different ways that we are trying to elicit feedback and engage the community. The other thing I didn't mention was ELAC and governance councils. So I know the elementary governance councils have already met. I believe there's going to be some meetings with the secondary coming up, as well as the ELACs, just to get parent and community feedback on some of the draft plans that we're putting together. So you can go to the next slide, please. Instructional delivery. I'm going to take a pause here to give kind of an announcement. So 10 days ago, we were moving fast and heavy towards a hybrid model. But in the last week, things have dramatically changed. And we've seen COVID, I think, nearly double in the county. We're now on the state's watch list. Yesterday, on another town hall meeting for the CTE Foundation, Senator McGuire shared that there were 61 beds out of 67 in ICUs in Sonoma County that were full. So we're nearing capacity. And what we're realizing, and there was an article in the Press Democrat just a couple days ago on the front page, is that we don't have the resources to adequately test efficiently in the county right now. In fact, the state came out with a plan that prioritizes different demographics of people for testing, essentially rationing testing at this point. Given all those factors in the context that we face, we do not feel that we are in a place where we can open school in person on August 19th. And so we are moving very quickly to planning for distance learning. And I want to make that announcement and make it very clearly right now that we will be opening in a distance learning environment on August 19th. We anticipate at least starting with 4 to 6 weeks just to see what happens. We need to establish some metrics along with the county public health officer around when and if we can open schools when things do settle down as it relates to the outbreak of COVID-19. But what we are seeing in the news is very clear that we need more resources locally. We need a downward trajectory, not an upward one, to be able to safely say we can bring our students and our staff back to school. I can't stand with integrity in front of you right now and say we could do that. And so we'll, like I said, be moving to distance learning. So when we made this slide deck a few days ago, we weren't there yet, but we are now. So the first point there is potential distance learning for all based on local context. We are there. All right. And then we are also planning for a hybrid version of learning, which involves 2 days of school in person and then 3 days of distance learning. Again, the reason for that is for students to be able to socially distance at 6 feet in the classroom. And so we can only take basically half a class at a time. And we'll talk more about that. We will, if we go to an in-person hybrid model at some point, we will have a full distance learning model available for families who do not want their kids coming back for obvious reasons. And so we've been working to that goal as well. We've also been working quite robustly with the city of Healdsburg to try and figure out ways that we can provide childcare, perhaps even some limited childcare if we're in a distance learning environment. There are some obstacles to funding, but we believe we can pull off some scholarship as well as sliding scale, cheap, affordable childcare for families that are working in a hybrid environment on the off days when your students are not in school, as well as perhaps in a distance environment if nobody's in school. So we're working with them. There will be more news coming out about that in the coming weeks. And then I'm excited to say that we believe we are going to be able to, when we can have in-person classes, we believe we'll be able to have K-3 at least open up 5 days a week with in-person classes. So it'd be almost normal, because what we will do is we will hire a few extra teachers to be able to have extremely small class size. The number would be 12 to 14 in kindergarten through 3rd grade, and which allows us to be able to socially distance. So we're excited for that. We're going to look at if there's ways to do more grades, and I'll talk more about why that's an obstacle, why there are obstacles to that in just a minute. If you can go to the next slide, Karen. So distance learning, I want to start with that because that is the mode that we are going to be beginning with. And I should stop because I didn't say it at the last slide. Every single piece of our planning has to be negotiated with our employee groups. And like I said, we're engaged in those negotiations now. So a lot of this is contingent upon that. And I just have to preface everything with that statement. That said, we understand and have heard loud and clear from you and from the students that there needs to be increased structure, support, and accountability when it comes to distance learning. It's going to be a whole different paradigm of distance learning this time around. We know that. We're committed to it. Hold harmless grading. We can't hold harmless at the beginning of the year when you're starting with no grade, right? So we have to find ways to overcome some of the equity issues that our students are facing and to support them to be able to achieve what they need to and progress through their education. We're working towards having weekly schedules and communication with parents and students, so you know what to count on, what to do when, what has been turned in. Frequent check-ins with teachers face-to-face in some online format. There will be a daily minimum and maximum set. That was not always happening in distance learning. That is something that we are working towards. You can count on your kids interfacing with their teachers on a daily basis for a structured amount of time. Increase virtual interventions, both academic and social emotional, with our counselors. We did a lot of that actually during distance learning in March to May, and we're going to continue with that. We have solved many of our technology issues. We have more hotspots available that we'll be able to distribute to families. I will say we do have a handful of families that live in places that just aren't going to get internet, way out in Alexander Valley or perhaps the Dry Creek Valley or West Side Road. And we're exploring options of potentially being able to bus those students into school, and they could work in a very large room, socially distanced, with transportation, food, and internet, as well as technology provided. I think we can overcome that in a safe manner for those students. And then finally, learning opportunities. We really want to push PBL. We want our kids to continue to engage in PBL that has been going on so robustly at the elementary schools. We think that's one of the best ways to do distance learning. And so we're working on pushing PBL throughout the district. And that involves having opportunities that provide choice, ownership, and real opportunities for student voice. So continuing, Karen. So I'm going to hand it off here to Director Conger and our nurses to talk about safety and wellness. And then the next slide gets into daily checks. So
I think Kristen's going to handle this for us.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to touch base here on safety and wellness when we're back at school. We will be having frequent cleaning and disinfecting. So what that means is we'll be cleaning all of the high touch surfaces. We'll have a team coming through doing that. There'll be deep cleaning at the end of the day. There'll be frequent hand washing and sanitizing. All of the classrooms will have hand sanitizing dispensers in them. We will have students washing their hands when they come to school and frequently throughout the day. Our plan is to set up a schedule for hand washing. And we will be closely monitoring all of the SCO guidelines and Sonoma County Department of Public Health, state guidelines, just so that we can stay in conjunction with that and keep everyone safe and clean when they're at school.
It's worth noting that this is contingent on us doing a hybrid model or some sort of in-person learning, right? And distance learning, this wouldn't apply, although staff who is present will be doing these things. So yeah.
Right, exactly.
Daily wellness checks.
Yep. Next slide, Karen. So it's recommended to do passive and active daily checks. So when students come to school, we will be checking their temperature via a no-touch thermometer, and we'll be doing wellness checks to make sure that they don't look sick before they come into school. We also will be asking parents to take their students' temperature before they come to school and do a symptom check with them before they come. Both myself or Varsi will be available for staff throughout the day. And we're hoping that each site, when we're back at school, will have a COVID team present so that if there is a student that does become positive, there's a very well thought out evidence-based protocol that we'll be following. That's to happen.
Yeah, and I do want to add, we did just purchase several temperature scanners similar to what you might see in an airport that we'll have set up when students come into school. So it won't even be thermometers, it'll be these scanners that can move kids along a little more rapidly. And we also, one thing that we didn't put on the slide was that masks will be required of all students and staff at all times, except when they're eating and possibly in certain environments. But for the most part, kids will be masked. And we'll be providing masks for both students and staff, although they're welcome to bring their own mask too. So logistics, kind of jumping off of what I said about the temperature scanners, we're going to have limited entrance points at each school. So for instance, at the high school, I know Bill Halliday has a plan to have 3 points of entry We will rope off the other areas that students might normally enter in, and we'll have staff manning each point with the temperature scanners to check kids as they come in, and then give them some identifying sticker or bracelet or something like that to show that they have been checked for the day. There will be staggered and structured lunch and recess and breaks to enable kind of the purity of cohort groups and not having large groups of kids intermingling. Again, we are in communication with Sonoma County Public Health and the County Office of Education around these protocols. And we have to negotiate. And ultimately, once we have our plan completely finished and negotiated and agreed upon, the school board does have to approve it. That is the last point in our creation. So we're going to move now to individual school plans. I'm going to have each principal talk briefly about their campus and what it would look like in a hybrid environment. And principals, feel free to talk about distance learning and maybe a little bit what you have envisioned for that too. So we'll start at HES with Principal Jeff Franey.
All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for being a part of this town hall. I also want to thank all of the members of the HES Planning Committee who have been putting in hours in their summertime to come up and meet each week. They've been giving us a lot of solid input. So a hybrid model for students, it would be the 2 days a week, the Mondays and Wednesdays, or Tuesdays and Fridays. And part of the reason we landed on these days so that we could coordinate childcare for students with siblings at both of HES and FMC campuses. Spanish instruction and enrichment would be done virtually. ELD, this would occur in class and possibly on non-student days. A staggered recess, like Superintendent Fanning Hoople said, staggered recess and lunch schedules with students in their classrooms before playing outside. And of course, masks would be required in the classrooms at all times, except when eating and of course at their desks. The 100% distance learning model is something that we are discussing currently. We talked about a whole class beginning of day routine just to kind of set it up, maybe a 10 or 15-minute check-in with the whole class, and then hitting small groups for the rest of the day to support both ELA and math. There would be a block for ELD and of course intervention at some point during the day. Spanish and enrichment classes would be on a Wednesday as of right now, which would free up teachers to collaborate and plan because like this whole thing, it's definitely new. It's going to take us a lot of time and collaboration to make sure that we're doing it right and serving the needs of your kids and families.
Great, so we can move on to Fitch Mountain School and Principal Erica McGuire.
All right, thank you very much. And a lot of what I'm going to say is going to echo what Principal Franey talked about for HES campus, because we do have a lot in common with our plans. So the hybrid model for FMC, students coming either Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays, with Wednesday being our non-student day. Wednesdays would be continue to be our day for enrichment, as well as we would have Spanish actually throughout the week. Students would continue to have Spanish instruction. ELD would be done both in person with a classroom teacher and also virtually with the classroom teacher and a paraprofessional to make sure our students have adequate number of minutes for ELD. We also are planning a staggered recess and lunch schedule. They would have do recess by grade level and lunch as well, eating at their desks in the classroom before going out to recess, and masks being required at all times, of course, as well. In the beginning, we were thinking that potentially they would be masks not required during recess and lunch. However, we are kind of still in conversation about that. Just because of the, doing our best to keep students socially distanced at recess and lunch. But however, finding times throughout the day, again, while they're eating or taking a break where they could take their masks off away from other students. As Superintendent Van Hoovel mentioned, we, even when we go back to the hybrid model, are planning to continue to have the 100% distance learning option for families who have chosen that. And then, of course, our campus would look a little bit different if we were able to have third graders here every day. But then we would continue, that would happen at the same time as the hybrid model for our 4th and 5th graders. And then again, as Principal Freeney talked about, and Superintendent as well, in this whole school distance learning model that we'll be starting the year on, there will be, it will look very different than it did in the spring with the daily teacher contact, doing that 30 minutes or more of a lesson with a teacher every day, as well as, check-ins virtually, or through Google Classroom, et cetera. So that's what our plan looks like right now.
And then we can move to Healdsburg Junior High with Principal Chris Miller.
All right, so we are looking at our hybrid model of having 2 groups of students as well. So Monday would be our day for students to distance learn solely. And then Group A would attend on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They would see each one of their classes for 1 extended block period. Tuesdays would be 1, 3, 5, and 7. And Thursdays would be 2, 4, and 6. And then Group B would be the same, except for on Wednesdays and Fridays.
Thank you, Principal Miller. And then finally, Principal Halliday from Healdsburg High School. Oh, wait.
I could speak to lunch just briefly. We're still developing exactly what that plan would look like. Right now, the plan would be to have lunch served in the classrooms with staff supervising, classified staff, and administrative staff supervising to make sure that students were safe. But again, that's in talks now, ongoing as we continue to look at best practices.
Yeah, and I'd add that elementary lunches would look much the same. We're looking at a model where you actually deliver a pre-packaged lunch to the rooms for the students to eat. And a lot still to be determined around lunch at the high school. I know that's a little more difficult, and we're doing a lot of creative brainstorming around that, but do want to keep students in cohorts and keep them safe. And so suffice it to say, lunches will be prepackaged and delivered to them also in some other way, shape, and form. The cafeteria model is gone pretty much in this hybrid environment. All right, so high school, Bill Halliday, Principal Halliday, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. And I'd also like to thank our high school community for chiming in and really putting in a lot of extra hours to work on different models and really problem solve with us. It's been quite a team effort. Our program, our proposal for hybrid learning is very similar to the junior high school. We share teachers and we share a similar 7-period day. So we're aligning ourselves very closely to what Mr. Miller already discussed, which is students split in half, either Tuesday, Thursday, or Wednesday, Friday groups, odd and evens. Monday would be distance learning for all students. We'd also be participating in all our special education 504 parent meetings on Mondays as much as possible, and also use that as a collaborative planning day for our teachers. In addition to the collaborative planning, we'd want our teachers on that day to, of course, check in with all students, again, in this hybrid model and all their classes on Monday, even if it's just a short check-in, but primarily having in-person classes one day a week in each class, and then the rest of the week would be distance learning. In a full distance learning model, we would also go with a 7-period day. We might reduce the minutes of the classes, and 85-minute to 100-minute classes may be difficult in a full distance learning model. But our goal for this is to have teachers much more interactive with the students and much higher participation levels with the students during full distance learning than they were in the spring due to the accountability factor changing greatly. On lunch, and as far as safety, Chris mentioned on the entrance and exits to school, I'd like to mention for lunches, we're looking at having kind of a grab and go lunch for our students, and have designated outside areas for our students to gather with safe social distancing.
Thank you, Principal Halliday. So we're going to move on to questions. And before I jump into questions, oh no, I'm sorry, special education. So Director Conger, you want to talk about special education services in the hybrid model?
I'd love to. So, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I know a lot of families are really struggling with what to do about, feelings that their students are falling further and further behind, especially if they have a disability or have some sort of unique need. And I just want to encourage the families to reach out. If you have an IEP, reach out to me, reach out to your case manager. 504s, reach out to your counselors, principals, and sort of help alleviate those fears. So I just wanted to say that in advance, because I won't be able to answer every single one of your questions or address every one of your needs in this short presentation. So in a hybrid model, and even in a distance learning model, the special ed services are unique to the student, but they basically follow the instructional schedule for the site as close as we can. And especially in a hybrid model, we'd like to meet the minutes that are in the IEP in as much in-person instruction as possible. And that might even look like additional days. Should we come back, some students come back 2 days, we are looking at ways that we could come back more than 2 days, provided we can keep the students safe. So as soon as we are able to see kids, we will be assessing students and determining progress on goals. And so from that, we might retool what an IEP looks like. And that would be the same for both a hybrid and a distance learning model. All of our IEP meetings, both for distance and hybrid, will be likely held virtually for the most part. I guess if there is a very specific need why we need to meet in person, we'll have to look at that. But I would encourage everyone to keep up with the virtual IEP meetings. They're going really well. Teletherapy is a model we've been using since March, and that's a way that we're delivering our more therapeutic services like mental health, occupational therapy, speech services, and including adaptive physical education. That will likely still occur to some degree, even in a hybrid model. It'll be a mix of both in-person and virtual, even in that model, to sort of mitigate the cross contact. Assessments, lots of questions about assessments. How are we going to do those? Should we come back to an in-person type of instruction? New assessments or reevaluations are going to be easier to accomplish than in a full distance learning model. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. So distance learning, just as Chris pointed out and the principals have pointed out, in March through May, I would say, we had to piece it together very quickly. We know a lot more now, and I would say we're going to be a lot more specific, a lot more precise on how we're going to serve students with IEPs and how we're going to accommodate students with 504 plans. So, but in a full distance learning model, all of those services would still have to be online. And much like how they'll be doing with their regular education teachers, each case manager would be required to meet with the students on a daily basis in some format online, and then a mix of paper-based online work, projects, things like that that are very specific to the student and meant to address their goals. So again, progress monitoring will have to be online. That's a little trickier. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. We're trying really hard to figure out a good way to do that. There'll be more increased, just like with general ed, very much increased contact with the families so we can make sure that we're meeting the students' needs. Also, even in a hybrid model, it's the case manager's responsibility to consult and make sure that the accommodations that are written into IEPs are being followed in the general education classroom, whether that be online or whether that be in person. So that will continue to happen. But the new assessments, until we can figure out how to do those in person, might be again delayed. We're waiting on some guidance from our county offices on that. Okay, That's it for
Okay.
me.
Thank you, Director Conger.
Sure.
So I want to talk just briefly about obstacles to a full reopening. We have this idea that when and if we can go to a hybrid model, that we could potentially do K-3 full-time back on a normal schedule. That's going to cost us an additional $400,000 approximately to be able to hire teachers and get the curriculum that we need to open up additional classrooms. When we look at doing 4-5, it's an additional $500,000. And then if we were to go, you know, to dream big and wish and hope that we could do grades 7 and 12, we're talking, you know, $2.5 million. We'd have to double our teaching workforce. And frankly, at the junior high and high school, we don't have the space to accommodate classes. We also have increased costs in cleaning and food service and personal protective equipment, which we've been ordering and stockpiling in anticipation for coming back. You can move on, Karen. And this, you know, so there's ideas coming out in the community about how we could potentially free up some money. The state has a lot of rules on how we can spend money. We get monies for specific purposes. We have a grant for our after school programs called the ACES grant. We can only spend that on childcare, not on instructional purposes. We can't spend our maintenance money on instruction. We have to have a certain amount spent on deferred maintenance. And so the state hasn't really changed the rules to categorical spending. We also must project 3 years into the future in our budgets. And so we have to show with money in hand that 3 years into the future, we'll have a budget reserve. Minimum is 3% by state law. Our board has set a 13.33% reserve because we're a community funded district and subject to kind of real estate fluctuations. Currently, as of June, when we were forecasting our budget, we showed 3.29% in the third year out. So we're right there where the state law is. We're already below the minimums that are set by our board. There's a lot of reasons we chose to do that. We do believe we're going to get more property taxes coming in this year, but we won't know those until school's already begun. So we may have more money to be able to do more grades, but we're not going to know for a while. It's kind of the crux of that. So when in-person learning is safely possible, we will talk about considering K-5 full reopening. I don't want to hear, you know, I don't want to make any promises. Please don't hear a promise from me that we're going to be able to pull off K-5. I'm very confident we can do K-3. But that is premised upon it being safe enough for us to bring our staff and students back to school. And like I began with, we are not there right now. So hopefully we will be soon. We desperately want to have the kids back in school. I know you do too, but I think we can all agree that it needs to be in a safe environment. So we're going to get now to questions that we received. Before I jump into those questions, I wanted to let you know we have a quick and fast email. If you have any kind of general questions about COVID-19 or reopening, email communications@husd.com. Again, communications@husd.com. We'll get it to the right person who can get you an answer fairly quickly. And that way it might be a little easier than trying to figure out who the correct person to send an email is to. So communications@husd.com. So we'll begin now with our questions. I'm going to read out some questions and ask different folks on the call to answer. The first question is actually for me, and we're going to start with some questions about distance learning. Can we assure parents that expectations for online learning will be set high with consequences similar to classwork and that will modify as needed for particular at-risk students? We can give you that assurance. That is our intent. We want distance learning to be much different than it was in the spring. We have discovered some things that really worked well that we experienced in the spring. And then we actually have an online high school summer school program going on right now that has been very successful in getting kids to recover grades and recoup credits. And some of the things such as quick and swift and frequent phone calls home the minute a student doesn't show up to Zoom, interventions one-on-one with students, pulling small groups who might be struggling to have a small group breakout on Zoom or Google Classroom, different ideas around keeping kids engaged and making sure parents know what's going on in terms of education. So that is our intent, and we know things need to change, and we will change them. The next question is, what online programs do we plan to offer students during distance learning? And so I'm going to ask two principals to take this one. We'll start with at HES, Jeff Franey. Principal Franey, can you tell us about online programs that students will be using during distance learning at your school?
Yes, so at the elementary level, we have three main platforms that we will use, Lexia, STMath, and learning.com. We are also going to be using Google Classroom as a platform for students to receive and or turn in assignments. They can build presentations and utilize all of the multiple tools within Google Drive to support their learning. Obviously, this is going to look a little different for a kindergartner, second grader, third, fourth, fifth grader. But I know that our teachers are already working extremely hard, and you know, from March to May, we were kind of jumping in and learning as we were going. Whereas now we have a little bit more of a runway so that we can make sure that the collaboration in the classrooms and the settings that you as parents and students are receiving are going to look a lot more similar, so that there's a little bit more continuity in instruction, in teaching, and in learning.
And why don't we hear from Principal Halliday at the high school? What kind of programs are you going to be able to offer for students during distance learning?
Well, all the high school teachers have created Power School Learning, online learning classrooms, and have loaded a great amount of material on that, and those were enhanced through our previous distance learning experience. And we also have a few teachers that use Google Classroom. So all of our students and our incoming students, because they do the same at the junior high school, are familiar with accessing resources through the online platforms of PSL or Google Classrooms. Many of our teachers also create their own online resources, filming lessons, sharing different lessons from different teachers throughout the country. And we also have teachers that use anything from our Math Vision project online supports to Khan Academy in math, and our Study Sync program in English. So there's a variety of resources and online supports that students are given access to. And I think Ms. Marks had a couple of things she wanted to add to this. Is that correct, Connie?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you can hear me or not.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we also have another platform that we utilize that's called Edmentum, and we also offer courses through that platform as well. And it supplements for some courses that we offer if students want to take courses on that platform for enrichment or for credit recovery. And they can take a variety of courses through that platform.
Thank you. I will say we have some professional development to do with our staff. Like I said, we've learned a lot. They've learned a lot. And we're working with the teachers to come up with ideas on how to best support them throughout this distance learning process that we're going to find ourselves in. And just some ideas that we're bantering around are we will bring in, I think, somebody to talk about equity in distance learning and what that means and how we can address issues of equity when we're online and what that means for a teacher and for students. We will also potentially, one thing that we're really excited about is we have a lot of teachers who really did great things, and we want to make them trainers for each other. And so working with them, compensating them for some of their planning time, and having them present to each other, what are some of the best practices that you've seen in distance learning? And I'll say SCO, the Sonoma County Office of Education, is also offering numerous courses and online opportunities for teachers to train on best practices. So we're working on putting that together for before school starts. We recognize there needs to be a balance of professional development and prep time for teachers, because we're literally just deciding on distance learning in the last few days. And so we've really had to adjust our planning quite quickly. So next question, still around distance learning, is how many hours a day will be dedicated to teacher and student, it says Zoom sessions, but really face-to-face time online in the elementary grade. So Principal McGuire, could you answer that question, please?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that we've heard a lot about from parents and conversations, and also in survey results. And as was spoken to before by superintendent and myself and Principal Freeney, we do think it's going to look very different here in the fall in terms of teacher contact. So we're still talking about this and discussing what the specific schedules will look like, and coming up with those schedules with our teachers. However, we do envision, as Principal Freeney talked about, some sort of whole class meeting in the morning, just for example, and then teachers seeing their students in small groups during the day to do those math and language arts lessons that then they could students could go do, for example, on Google Classroom. So again, much more robust of still doing, focusing on that community building with the morning meeting as an example, but then much more direct instruction with between the teacher and the student. And if I may, Superintendent, quickly, one of the things I didn't talk about in terms of the structure here at FMC in a hybrid model is that our plan still is to have specialists here at Fitch Mountain campus, which means that students would have a STEM and a humanities teacher. If that may change, if you know, with third grade, if we are able to bring on another teacher so students can come back, so that may change. However, that question I have seen come up, and that still is our plan in the hybrid model. What we're talking about is students staying in the same desks in the same classroom all day, and the teacher switching. We've worked with and talked to our maintenance department, and they really feel that custodians can come through and clean all of the surfaces that are shared. Teachers would have work areas in both classrooms. So I did want to just mention that. Sorry, it's unrelated to this question, but.
Yeah. The last question on distance learning is, as a significant portion of learning will be online, can we optimize this process by offering already existing online teaching and courses from other sources? And this is an interesting, I'm going to take this one. This is an interesting question because it's a convoluted answer. The answer is yes and no. We are looking, and our teachers did a great job finding sources last year that they could point kids towards in different directions. My own kids who were in several AP classes at the high school were watching lectures from other AP teachers from across the country as assigned by their teacher at Hillsburg High School. But the state legislature was very clear in its trailer bill in the budget that came right at the end of June that we're not to create an online learning environment that is independent study where there's not face-to-face time with the teacher. It's not intended to be, as you would see in a charter school that's all online. It's intended to be FaceTime with their classroom teacher, even in a distance learning environment. And so we have this this task of basically taking what we do in the classroom and doing it online as best we can, and not just simply subscribing to an internet company or an education company on the internet who provides courses for our kids to take, as that is not legal in the trailer bill. So yes, we can use existing things, but no, we can't simply basically outsource the teaching, which I'm not positive that was what was suggested. But so moving on, kind of more to health and wellness. Will there be full transparent disclosure of cases, who, where, and when, which occur on HUSD campuses? And I'm going to ask Director Conger and our nurses to answer that question.
So I think our Kristen is going to answer that one for us, and she could be very specific and to talk about rights and how we might articulate, the communication plan. So Kristen, you want to take that one?
Sure. I just want to take a minute to introduce myself and Varsi, just in case you guys don't know, that the parents haven't met us. We both have a pretty extensive history in nursing. I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've worked in hospitals. I have my master's degree. I've taught at Sonoma State. And Varsi, I'll let you introduce yourself just so people kind of have a background on where we're coming from.
Sure. I'm Varsi. This will be my third year with Healdsburg. I am a family nurse practitioner, and I have experience in family practice, pediatrics, pediatric neurology, lots of experience with kids and parents.
So all of our answers to these questions, all are evidence-based. They're all based on CDC recommendations from Sonoma County Department of Education, the Department of Public Health. We've been in close conversations with the Department of Public Health. And as we all know, things are constantly changing. So we will do our best to answer the questions that we have. But as you have our email address, so if you have specific questions, please feel free to get in touch with us. So in regards to disclosure of cases, if a student has come in contact with a COVID positive person, you as a parent will be notified as soon as possible. This will be done in accordance with all of the state and local regulations. However, confidentiality will be maintained as to the identity of the COVID positive person. We will not be violating any sort of HIPAA, but we also want to make sure that parents feel safe and are notified if their student is exposed.
And same goes for staff. Staff will also
And for staff.
Yeah.
Yes, student, that should be student
Right.
and staff. Yes.
Okay, so the next question is, what benchmarks is the school setting to be able to return to more in-class learning? And are we at the mercy of the Sonoma County Public Health Officer, or do we have some discretion? That is a great question. We are working on, actually as a county, the superintendents are meeting next week to begin talking about metrics and ask for the county health officer's assistance in establishing metrics that would enable us to return to safe in-person classes. The data around coronavirus is changing daily. We've just learned in the last 2 weeks, it's most likely airborne, right? And so it's changing how we have to think about it, and it's going to change the metrics that we come up with to say when and if it's safe to come back to school. So I wouldn't say we're at the mercy of Dr. Mace. I would say we are happy to have Dr. Mace's assistance. Currently, we seem to have some discretion, although there is a rumor that the governor is going to hold a press conference tomorrow and potentially announce some school closures within the state. Things can change, right? And right now, as it stands, we have discretion. We have to, I will say we are going to follow all public health guidelines, both from the CDC, from the state, and from Sonoma County. But we have discretion to be able to make a decision whether we open or not. And like I said earlier, we're not in a position to do so given the lack of resources that are local. But we will be working towards setting benchmarks that are clear, some metric system to establish when and if it's safe for our staff and our students to return. Great question. The next one is, if HUSD decides to have campus classroom learning, will there be on-site testing for COVID-19? And the answer is no. I do not anticipate that we will become a testing site. We will work with parents and with students and with staff who may have come into contact with somebody to get them to a place with free or cheap testing. We will obviously engage with public health and contact tracing, et cetera, but I don't anticipate that we'll be testing, running our own testing program here at HUSD, unless public health was to come and set up a test center for us. So that's not something that we anticipate. In regards to campuses, what does the anticipated protocol look like should a student, teacher, or small group test positive for COVID? They're asking about time frame. What if a student or staff member is exposed outside of school? What is the notification process going to look like? So I'm going to ask Diane and once again, our nurses, Kristen and Barcy, to answer, please.
Sure, I'll take this one. So if a student or staff member tests positive and the district is the first to know, the student or staff who contracts the virus should stay at home. The student or staff member who is infected with COVID-19 should be excluded from on-campus instruction until a medical provider states in writing that they are no longer contagious. Any student or staff who had close contact with the person who tested positive for COVID-19 will be notified and should stay home and self-monitor for symptoms for 14 days and follow CDC guidance if symptoms develop. Quarantine may be necessary for individuals who had close contact, so that's 6 feet or less, with a COVID positive individual during the infectious period for 15 minutes or longer. As far as notification, in accordance with state and local laws, school administrators will notify our local health department, staff, and families immediately of a case of COVID-19 while maintaining confidentiality as required by state and federal laws, including the American with Disabilities Act and HIPAA. The need to quarantine an entire class cohort or school site will be determined by the Sonoma County Public Health Department, depending on the extent of the exposure. So that's the duration, how many people are exposed, how close the contacts were. Closure of an entire school would be determined by the county public health official if there's an outbreak involving many cases in more than one classroom at that school site. And then if someone tests positive based on a county health contact tracing. So if the health department finds out before we do, Sonoma County Public Health registered nurse will notify a school district or our school district when a student or staff member is confirmed positive with COVID-19, and they will lead the contact tracing, and they will identify whether quarantine of impacted students and staff is necessary. Contacts will be identified based on the duration of the contact, the proximity of the contact, and the number of people exposed.
Thank you. I do want to say we're putting together a reopening plan, and pretty much everything we're talking about will be in that document and approved by the board. And so that draft we anticipate being ready around the beginning of August, and that will be posted on the website. We'll make sure parents know where to find it with all these protocols. So, and I do want to recognize the nurses again. They have put in a lot of time working with public health and examining CDC protocols to make sure we have all these things in place to ensure safety. So thank you. I actually skipped a question that I know you were waiting for. What is the plan for kids with asthma and other compromised immune systems, I think, when it comes to masking specifically?
Great question. So students that are at higher risk for severe illness will be offered options that limit their exposure risk. So if we were to go back to hybrid learning, that would be like virtual learning opportunities. A note needs to be provided by a nurse practitioner, physician's assistant, doctor of osteopath, or a medical doctor. With that said, I would like, if someone has questions specific to that, please email me so we can kind of work together and figure out what would be the best plan for your student if you're concerned that your student has health risks and will be coming back to the classroom. I'd be happy to work with you to keep students safe. That's all of our goals. So. Thank
you. There's two questions that come up around IEPs and students in special education, Diane. When can we expect a detailed plan from the district on our IEP team with accommodation options for the different learning scenarios, and how do we plan to accommodate children with IEPs and other special education needs? Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
So first of all, I think it's important to know that the case managers are the leads on this, but parents are definitely an active part of the IEP team. So in terms of a detailed plan, I can say that we're working on that right now, and we know that the plan that we had in the spring needs to look, fundamentally different than what it's going to look like in the fall. But prior to school starting, I would anticipate that you're going to hear from the case managers, and they will try to schedule a meeting with you within the first 30 days to make sure that that we're all on the same page in terms of the general ed teacher, the special ed teacher, any other members of the team, in order to make sure the student is accessing both distance learning, and a hybrid model would look a little bit different, of course. And so we'd need to speak about that.
Thank you. So shifting to, there are a number of questions around why don't we just go do outside classrooms, right? We're obviously not planning on starting with a hybrid environment, but when and if we do get to, how can we utilize outdoor spaces? And I think it's a great question. One thing that I think is going to be a little bit confusing is you may see private schools or other places utilize tents, like a big circus tent or something you get from a rental company to set up classrooms. As a public school, we're precluded from doing that. There's a law called the Field Act that requires that any structure that you put students under for instructional purposes be approved by the Department of State Architecture, which is a very lengthy and safety-oriented approval process. It's a good thing. We want schools built to a high degree of safety. This is where we put our kids. So, DSA also governs the building of hospitals. So we aren't able to actually rent tents and put kids in them for school. It's not legal under California law. That said, can we use outdoor spaces? Absolutely. And the principals have all been thinking about how and where and how teachers can utilize outdoor spaces. Also, questions about HVAC as it relates to that, our air systems on campuses. It is sort of new news that the virus may be airborne. That said, we were already planning to adjust all of our HVAC systems to maximize the amount of outside air that was coming in. So you can adjust the amount of outside air instead of simply recirculating the inside air. So we had plans to do that, to have robust filtering, maintenance schedule. All of our filters are MERV 11 or MERV 13, which are much higher rated than most of your homes. The other thing that we've actually talked about specifically in negotiations is making sure that windows and doors on classrooms are open when students and staff are in them. So combination of making sure we're maximizing outside air coming in through the HVAC, and then making sure we have doors open and windows open as well. But I'll be the first to say, I think we need more data on how airborne the virus is and what it really means for schools. There was a question about air scrubbers. We were looking at buying some air scrubbers for the rooms that didn't have as good a circulation, potentially didn't have an outside door or window. But with this new data coming in, we might have to reassess and see if it's necessary for other places. And again, it's ever changing, and we have to be fluid in the situation. So we're looking at all aspects. And again, we're not going to be starting in-person classes, and so we do have time to figure some of those things out. Cleaning methods and schedules. We do already use a pretty robust cleaning schedule, and we were using it last year when everything began. Our plan is to have a deep disinfecting of every classroom daily. So we actually have like this Mister technology that the janitorial custodial staff use. They come in and they mist every surface and let it sit for a prescribed amount of time and then wipe it down in every classroom. We will have custodial staff cleaning high touch surfaces throughout the day when kids are present. Your doorknobs, your light switches, your drinking fountains, things like that. We had even been exploring having high school and junior high students using alcohol wipes to rub down their desks after class. That's the one issue when we have secondary. You can't truly cohort kids in the way that secondary schools are structured. And so when we were going to be switching classes, we were going to need to wipe down our desks somehow. And then, of course, frequent hand washing and hand sanitizing available at all areas in campus. And basically, in secondary, when kids walk in the door and when they're walking out the door, they're hand sanitizing. That will prevent the spread of germs. So we do have robust cleaning procedures. Moving on, we have some kind of bits and pieces, different questions that are specific to different individuals. And I thought some of them might be relevant to folks. We had this come up this last year. Students at the high school, every student in the 9th grade is required to take PE, physical education. But you can get your second year of physical education credit, which you need for graduation, by participating in sports. This last year, we ran into students who were anticipating participating in a spring sport, which was taken away because of the outbreak and pandemic, and therefore weren't able to complete their PE requirement. And I want to give this question to Bill. What can kids do who were on that PE requirement and athletics plan for graduation? Bill Halliday, do you want to answer that question?
Yes. Last year, we did go to the board for a waiver for a certain number of our graduates that fell into that category because they couldn't finish up by playing a spring sport. We may have to do the same thing in the coming year for students who had planned to do that. Our recommendation is going to be for students who are 5 or 10 credits short of PE, if they can fit it into their schedule, to sign up for our physical education or our conditioning classes at school. And the hope is also that, and I know there's another question about this, but the hope is that we'll be able to run short, kind of truncated sports seasons starting in the winter and have a fall, winter, spring sports season in the second semester. And then we'll be able to accommodate those students in that way.
Yeah, the California Interscholastic Federation, which is the governing body of California high school sports, is going to release a plan for this next year on the 20th, next week, if I'm not mistaken. So we're anticipating that, and we do believe it's going to be a truncated season plan, like Principal Halliday mentioned. So thank you.
Yeah, we do, and this is getting on to the next question, I think, on the list, but we do believe that CIF is going to recommend that we don't run fall sports. We are hoping for some local options and flexibility that we may be able to run certain sports that have less social distancing challenges. But again, we'd probably have short seasons in the spring semester.
Great, thank you. So next question, still with Principal Halliday, and you know what, this is a question near and dear to my heart. I have a senior, a rising senior at Healdsburg High. Any information particular to families of seniors? How can families and seniors prepare? I guess I'm asking you that as a parent too, Bill.
Okay, Chris, you have to remind your son first and foremost that unlike last year, our students will be held accountable for their academic performance in a distance learning or a hybrid environment. Sadly, many of our students got accustomed to resting on their laurels of good grades and didn't do much interaction engagement with us in the second semester after March 13th. They have to first be reminded that they're going to need to pass all their classes to get their diploma and move on to university or whatever program they're looking for after school. Second part is kind of the traditions of graduation, the traditions of the senior year. We will do, we'll be communicating as we get closer to the calendar dates for, you know, senior dinner dance, proms, events, of course, graduation, depending on where we are with our requirements and what events we can anticipate and plan for. And lastly, and I know this came through a question on the Facebook questions, is that we will still have a full and career center on campus. And so support will be there, not just through Kelly Mason, Everett Flores for college applications and a review of that process, but also with Shelley Anderson when we're talking about internships, college options, and different post-graduation career options. Students will be able to set up appointments with all those individuals to make their post-graduation plans.
Yeah, and I want to encourage, you know, we're beginning the college planning process, and it's the Wild West out there. Some schools have gotten rid of the SAT altogether. Some are saying you don't have to have it for admission, but you might need it for scholarships. Use our counselors at the high school. They know what they're doing. They've been doing this for a long time, and they will have the latest information at their fingertips. So I really encourage families to reach out and use both Mr. Flores and Ms. Mace as they go through college planning. This is going to be one of the strangest college planning years, I think, on the books. So thank you. I want to just piggyback on what Principal Halliday talked about in terms of grading. I want to be clear. There will be grading closer to normal school grading that you see in distance learning than was in our hold harmless distance learning environment in the spring. Again, we were thrust into that in an emergency situation with not much time to plan and prepare. That's different now. And our program that we're anticipating is holding students accountable and supporting them to reach high levels of achievement and grading in a way that is much more I don't want to say traditional, but much closer to what students normally see in classes. So students will be held to grading accountability as we begin this year. We can't hold them harmless when they're starting with no grades. So simply put, and we did see that there was some big issues with the hold harmless policy that was implemented, and it was largely implemented statewide. So moving on, the next question is, in case elementary school will be conducting 5 days a week distance learning for the fall semester, which hopefully we won't be the whole semester, what kind of childcare and distance learning assistance will be put in place for dual income families? So as I said earlier, we are working with the City of Healdsburg and the Boys and Girls Club of Healdsburg to provide some childcare opportunities. We had it fairly almost cemented for hybrid. And then, like I said in the last week, we've really been thrust into this idea of distance learning and forced to start prepping for that. We believe we're going to have an opportunity to still do the same thing, to provide some free and then a sliding scale for affordable childcare for families of kids through junior high. More information definitely to come forthwith. We're still working on it, but we have a great partnership both with the City of Healdsburg's Recreation Department and the Boys and Girls Club of Healdsburg. So confident that we're going to be able to have some resources available to our families. No matter what plan is initially implemented, okay, so this is, should the virus fall dramatically in HUSD, are we prepared to transfer back to a 5-day-a-week plan, normal actually? If the county returns to phase 3, can we please confirm the availability of full-time in-person learning? So the phases are actually, they don't tie to schools right now in current practice. The phases are actually for businesses. I will say phase 4 is everything back to normal. So we can promise back to normal when everything is back to normal. That means COVID is largely gone and we've got vaccines or herd immunity or whatever the case may be. I don't know what will happen in phase 3. We're in phase 2 and we're regressing. So I can't make a guarantee to full in-person learning in phase 3. When they were first establishing the phases, there was some talk about tying schools to those phases. And I will tell you that the phasing at that point was phase 1 and 2 was distance learning, and phase 3 was hybrid. And then full, not hybrid, it was socially distanced classes. And as long as we're having to do socially distanced classes with kids 3 feet apart, that means our class size has to be extremely small to be able to accommodate kids in the classroom with the teachers. And so, like I said earlier, we think we can do it for K3, very confident in that. There's a maybe for 4 and 5. It's not doable for the high school and the junior high. We wouldn't have enough rooms and we wouldn't have enough funding to be able to pull it off. But there's more work to be done on that. Maybe the governor will tie us into the phasing. We would love nothing more than a little bit more guidance on when and if we can reopen, and some clear metrics. But at this point, like a question asked earlier, a lot of the decision-making is laid on the local district. How it'll be handled when a student doesn't want to wear a mask in class or needs to take it off because they can't breathe well. I'm going to ask 2 different principals to maybe address this one. Principal Franey from HES, you want to start with our littles? How are you going to handle that?
Sure. So if a student can't breathe, obviously there's going to be a situation where we would, the teacher would contact the office or, a staff member to come and help and support them. And we've talked about in our planning process about if somebody has a documented, like whether it be asthma or otherwise, of course, we're going to be implementing, more consistent breaks than, someone that doesn't. Wearing a mask is new to all of us. So we are definitely expecting that there are going to be instances where, kinder, first and second graders don't want to wear the mask. This is actually a teachable moment. I think that everyone within HUSD, all of the staff are definitely taking this seriously. So that in itself is going to be the first model of if all of the adults around you are modeling that to you, that's also going to be something that can help. What we don't want to have happen is it becoming a punitive instance. Yes, this is very serious. Yes, we are taking it seriously. The safety and health of our students and staff is of utmost importance. But we also want this to be a teachable moment. Why are we wearing masks? What is the importance of it? We've also talked about, a couple of teachers have sent me videos and kid-friendly literature about how germs spread and what we can do as students to kind of be champions to help each other out. But if it does become a more consistent occurrence, then we would definitely treat it like any other consistent occurrence of behavior where we would bring in the family, we would make sure that we're communicating the importance of wearing a mask to both the students and the parents as well. But what we definitely don't want to have happen is it become some sort of a behavior issue that becomes something that's not meeting the needs of the child emotionally, because that's definitely also very important in a time like this.
Yeah, and I think at the junior high school level, we would have a similar policy in place. So we would, first of all, actively encourage parents to let students know that this is going to be a requirement at school at all times. We will be reinforcing that and modeling that with our own behavior as well. And our nurses touched on the fact that there may be some exemptions or for students who have particular medical needs that could include wearing a face shield rather than a face mask. All those examples are being explored. But again, similar to what Principal Franey mentioned, that would be a time for us to speak with the student involved if they are sort of refusing to wear it, get the parent involved, and hopefully thwart it at the beginning so that it doesn't become an ongoing issue and doesn't require punitive consequences.
Yeah, I'd like to add that I'm very confident that we can do this in an educational sort of way, as both Principal Franey and Miller suggested. We will be asking parents to partner with us for sure. Actually, both nurses have been working on educational materials, maybe some videos around hand washing, mask wearing, the importance of social distancing at 6 feet. I think I misspoke earlier and said 3. Please do not hear 3 feet, it's 6 feet. And so we will be having a robust educational program around all these important practices to make sure students understand why they need to do them and make sure that they actually do them. We're nearing the end of our questions. Last question. I'm going to give this one to Principal McGuire and maybe Principal Miller. Are parents going to be able to request children be able to be cohorted with their friends, essentially, or kids that they've already been in contact with?
So I'll start with this one, answering this question. So I understand where this question is coming from. We know that families have chosen to sort of pod with their friends or their their child's friends over the summer. However, our first priority in creating our classes is going to be to create balanced classes. Our teachers actually in the spring already created classes for the falls for the next grade level. So our first priority is going to be to separate those classes in two and to create the academic and behavior, et cetera, gender balance in those classes. And our second priority is going to be to schedule siblings on the same date. As Principal Freeney mentioned earlier, we do have 2 days a week that siblings can go to school on the same day from families. So those are going to be our first 2 priorities. We will take into consideration requests from families to be cohorted with their friends or their students' friends. However, just again, our first priorities are going to be to create balanced classes and for siblings. And so it will be very complicated to schedule and to take all of that into account and to satisfy all of those requests.
Thanks,
Yes,
Principal Miller.
I would go ahead and echo what Principal McGuire said, and also mention that at the secondary level, whether that's here at Healdsburg Junior High School or at Healdsburg High School, we will not be able to offer true cohorts of students because of the nature of our scheduling. So it would be impossible to give true cohorts, but we will take into account recommendations or suggestions, requests from parents as much as we can, and still maintaining balance in all of our classes. That's also reflective of the demographics of our campus in a normal time.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap it up. I want to remind parents to email communications@husd.com with any other questions that you might have. If you feel like you sent us a question, it wasn't answered, we feel like we got to most of the questions that were answered, either through the presentation or the Q&A period here. But if you don't feel like you got an answer that you wanted, please email communications@husd.com and we'll do our best to get back to you with current information. I do want to say, if you walk away with just a few things tonight, first I want you to hear that we are going to distance learning. It simply isn't safe right now for us to open for our staff and students. I also want you to hear that distance learning will be different. It will be more robust. There will be more FaceTime, not FaceTime like on your phone, but Zoom and Google Classroom time with teachers, whether it's in a whole class environment or a small group. There will be more structure to it. There will be more accountability. Grading will happen. It will be much different than it was in the spring. So distance learning is distance learning 2.0. It's a whole different way of doing it than what we experienced in the spring. We are still working on it, and I want to be clear about that. We just made this decision in the last few days. It really is a whole paradigm shift for us. We had been working very hard in the hybrid model because that's where we thought we were going. And now we're having to pivot midsummer and come up with a distance learning model that is much different, like we're promising. And so we will be working with our staff over the next 3 or 4 weeks to come up with a model and have a plan in place that will make very clear and apparent to parents and to students, but would ask that you give us the time to do that. We need to collaborate with our staff and come to agreements with our bargaining units to do so. So this is where we see it headed. And ultimately it will take the shape of a reopening plan that'll be approved by the school board. I also want to acknowledge that there were numerous comments on Facebook. I'm not able to see it, but I'm hearing from people that there's a desire for more of these kinds of meetings. And I don't have a problem saying that we are definitely committed to getting more information out to you in this format if it works. There's even a suggestion of site-specific meetings. I'm not going to put the principals on the spot and make a promise, but I think that's something we could do so that principals could answer site-specific questions from parents as we get closer to opening. Again, we need more time to really put some specifics on. There's a lot of unanswered questions on the health side. And we need to work on the instructional side of distance learning with our teachers and make sure they have the support and the professional development that they need. So we will need some time before we do another meeting like this, but suffice it to say, We will do another town hall as a district. We will do some site town halls for each of the school sites, and we'll get you information as we get closer to school starting. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to give you a little bit of clarity, I hope, and probably the most uncertain time any of us have ever lived through. And I just wish you all the best and hope that you and your families, your kids, are safe and stay healthy through the summer. Okay, thank you very much.